Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihar Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Harinam Sankirtan ki Shri Prabhupada ki. So all devotees, today we have the blessed good fortune of having His Grace Devakinandan Prabhu from Singapore. Most long awaited class. We have been trying to have Prabhuji for the last 6 months. As you all know, he is one of the senior most disciples of His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj, who is very dear to the heart of all Pune Vasis. And Maharaj used to almost every day call him on phone and offer him guidance. And through him, Maharaj was taking care of hundreds and thousands of devotees. Prabhuji actually is a lawyer by profession in Singapore. And he has been in ISKCON since 1983. His service as a general counsel for GVC and ISKCON, where he advises and oversees legal matters on a global level. He is also a GDO for legal affairs, and he is a member of the Organization Development, OrgDev, and GBC Nomination Committee. He also is serving as a zonal supervisor for ISKCON Singapore and MBT trustee. And on the order of his Guru, since His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj's departure from this material world, Prabhu has been extensively traveling and preaching, because Maharaj used to travel a lot and give personal support to many, many devotees, both in India, Gulf, and abroad, other places. But after Maharaj's Vaikunthavas, after that, Prabhuji has been taking that role of traveling and giving encouragement and nourishment to all devotees across the globe. Along with that, he has the task of overseeing management of Krishna Conscious Preaching Center in Singapore, as well as ISKCON temples in Dwaraka and Rajkot, which is actually like the main temple of His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj. Actually, at Singapore, we have one of our Pune devotees, Dinabandhu Chaitanya Prabhu, living in Singapore. So I get a lot of information, nice, inspiring information from him about what is happening at Singapore. I heard that practically 30 days in a month, there are 30 different Bhagavatam speakers. Prabhuji also empowers different devotees, disciples of different gurus, to give the Srimad Bhagavatam classes and encourages them. And he personally gives several hours of Srimad Bhagavatam in-depth study for the devotees there. And they are actually making a video, short video about the Singapore community. It is not just a bunch of devotees, but a very good community, very Krishna-centered and advanced community of devotees there. And once you get the video, we will learn many nice principles from Devakinandan Prabhu. He's an expert preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam and a wonderful kirtan leader. If any of you want to hear his kirtans, you should see Krishna Premanjana series. If you go to YouTube, Krishna Premanjana series, you can find out. Prabhuji sings very, very melodious kirtans. Actually, he was here with us in Kunjiberi temple and in Nvcc also some years ago. And after the COVID is over, we will invite him again when he comes to India to visit us. Whenever he comes to India, we have a standing invitation for Prabhuji to come to Pune, both the temples. And we would like to welcome him to Sri Sri Radha Vrindavan Chandra Temple by loudly chanting three Haribols. Haribol! 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 Is it Devakinandan Prabhu ki?
Adesham Prabhu, my obeisances to you and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. My humble obeisances to all the devotees who are assembled today everywhere in Pune. Thank you so much for encouraging us to study Bhagavatam so that we can at least, imbibe some of the nice, wonderful points that have been taken for this wonderful festival of Lord Narasimha Dev's appearance, which is coming up. We are just very fortunate that in the Sadhu Sangha of devotees like Radhesham Prabhu, many devotees from Pune who came to Singapore have imbibed that mood, and they have been such wonderful assets in the Singapore congregation. And thank you, Prabhu, for having such a loving, warm relationship and taking care of devotees. The topic today is the protection of the Supreme Lord and compassion of his devotee. The protection of the Supreme Lord, we leave it in the good Lord's hand. But the compassion of his devotees, I think in Pune, you'll all agree with me that no one stands better for the emblem of compassion than Radhesham Prabhu. So thank you so much, Prabhu, for giving us this opportunity. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Let's look at a verse from the 5th canto, 18th chapter, 9th verse. Swasti astu vishwasya kala prasidatam dhyayantu bhutani shivam mito dhiya manascha badram bhajata dadoksaje aveshyatam no matirapi ahaituki. Swasti astu vishwasya kala prasidatam dhyayantu bhutani shivam mito dhiya manascha badram bhajata dadoksaje aveshyatam no matirapi haituki. Swasti astu vishwasya kala prasidatam dhyayantu bhutani shivam mito dhiya manascha badram bhajata dadoksaje aveshyatam no matirapi ahaituki. Swasti, auspiciousness. Astu, let there be. Vishwasya, of the entire universe. Kalaha, the envious, almost everyone. Prasidatam, let them be pacified. Dhyayantu, let them consider. Bhutani, all the living entities. Shivam, auspiciousness. Mitaha, mutual. Diya, by their intelligence. Manaha, the mind. Cha, and. Bhadram, calmness. Bhajatad, let it experience. Adoksaje, in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is beyond the perception of mind, intelligence, and senses. Aveshyatam, let it be absorbed. Naha, our. Matihi, intelligence. Api, indeed. Ahaituki, without any motive. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. May there be good fortune throughout the universe, and may all envious persons be pacified. May all living entities become calm by practicing Bhakti Yoga, for by accepting devotional service, they will think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, Lord Sri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of him. Please hear the purport. The following verse describes a Vaishnava. Vancha kalpatu pyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patittanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Just like a desire tree, A Vaishnava can fulfill all the desires of anyone who takes shelter of his lotus feet. Prahlad Maharaj is a typical Vaishnava. He prays not for himself, but for all living entities, the gentle, the envious, and the mischievous. He always thought of the welfare of mischievous persons like his father, Hiranyakashipu. Prahlad Maharaj did not ask for anything for himself. Rather, he prayed for the Lord to excuse his demoniac father. This is the attitude of a Vaishnava, who always thinks of the welfare of the entire universe. Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavata Dharma are meant for persons who are completely free of envy. Parama Nirmatsaranam. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays in this verse, Kalaha Prasidatam. May all the envious persons be pacified. The material world is full of envious persons. But if one frees himself of envy, he becomes liberal in his social dealings and can think of others' welfare. Anyone who takes up Krishna consciousness and engages himself completely in the service of the Lord cleanses his mind of all envy. Manascha badram bhajatad adoksaje. Therefore, we should pray to Lord Narasimha Dev to sit in our hearts. We should pray to Lord Narasimha Dev to sit in our hearts. We should pray, Bahir Narsingho Hridaye Narsingha. Let Lord Narasimha Dev sit in the core of my heart, killing all my bad propensities. Let my mind become clean, so that I may peacefully worship the Lord and bring peace to the entire world. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has given us a very fine purport in this regard. Whenever one offers a prayer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one always requests some benediction from him. Even pure, nishkama devotees pray for some benediction, as instructed by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Sikshashtaka. Ainanda tanuja kinkaram, patitam mam vishame bhavam budau, kripaya tava pada pankaja, stita duli sadrisham vichintaya. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from the ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. In another prayer, Lord Chaitanya says, Mama janmani janmanishware bhavatad bhakti rahai tuki tvai. Life after life, kindly let me have unalloyed love and devotion at your Lordship's lotus feet. When Prahlad Maharaj chants Om Namo Bhagavate Narsinghaya, he prays for a benediction from the Lord. But because he is also an exalted Vaishnava, he wants nothing for his personal sense gratification. The first desire expressed in his prayer is Swasti Astu Vishwasya. Let there be good fortune throughout the entire universe. Prahlad Maharaj thus requested the Lord to be merciful to everyone, including his father, a most envious person. According to Chanakya Pandit, there are two kinds of envious living entities. One is a snake, and the other is the man like Hiranyakashipu, who is by nature envious of everyone, even of his father or son. Hiranyakashipu was envious of his little son Prahlad, but Prahlad Maharaj asked the benediction for the benefit of his father. Hiranyakashipu was very envious of devotees, but Prahlad wished that his father and other demons like him would give up their envious nature by the grace of the Lord and stop harassing the devotees. Kalaha prasidatam. The difficulty is that the kala, envious living entity, is rarely pacified. One kind of kala, the snake, can be pacified simply by mantras or by the actions of a particular herb. Mantra aushudhi vashaha sarpa kalakena nirvayate. An envious person, however, cannot be pacified by any means. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays that all envious persons may undergo a change of heart and think of the welfare of others. If the Krishna consciousness movement spreads all over the world, and if by the grace of Krishna everyone accepts it, the thinking of envious people will change. Everyone will think of the welfare of others. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays, Shivam mito diya. In material activities, everyone is envious of others. But in Krishna consciousness, no one is envious of anyone else. Everyone thinks of the welfare of others. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays that everyone's mind may become gentle by being fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna. Bhajatat adok saje. As indicated elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam, Savai Manaha Krishna Padaravindayo, and as advised by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad-Gita 1865, Man Mana Bhava Mad Bhaktaha, one should constantly think of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then one's mind will certainly be cleansed. Cheto Darpana Marjanam. Materialists always think of sense gratification, but Prahlad Maharaj prays that the Lord's mercy will change their minds and they will stop thinking of sense gratification. If they think of Krishna always, everything will be all right. If they think of Krishna always, everything will be all right. Some people argue that if everyone thought of Krishna in that way, the whole universe would be vacated because everyone would go back home, back to Godhead. However, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that this is impossible because the living entities are innumerable. If one set of living entities is actually delivered by the Krishna consciousness movement, another set will fill the entire universe. Jai, Srila Prabhupada's transcendental purports ki. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So thank you again, Prabhus, Matajis, devotees, for coming together today. We just heard a wonderful verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Sometimes we only look at Prahlad Maharaj's pastimes in the 7th canto, but we forget that there are at least 7-8 beautiful prayers that Prahlad Maharaj actually sings as part of the residence of Jambudvip in the 5th canto, 18th chapter. And those prayers, we should study them very carefully when we have time. Why? Because in those prayers, Prahlad Maharaj is already residing in a tract of land where he's praying to Lord Narasimha. And the entire cream of the pastime of Prahlad Maharaj has actually been enacted. This is the beauty of Bhagavatam. Sometimes if you study Bhagavatam in a linear fashion, you become very confused. Why? Because Bhagavatam is a collection of events as they unfold and realizations as they unfold. And when they meet, sometimes they appear as if they may be in different cantos. But actually, there is a nice flow. This is a very important point for us to remember. Today's topic is actually concerning 2 areas that are related to this very important verse. One is the protection of the Supreme Lord, and the other is the compassion of the devotees. Sometimes we may ask ourselves, one part of this discussion today is actually centering on protection, but the other is actually talking about compassion. Is there any link to each other? One very important point that we can take from Bhagavatam is actually when you think about it in real life, in our experience, you cannot feel protected by one unless that person is compassionate. Think about it. You'll only feel protected by someone when that person is actually compassionate to you. You're all feeling very protected in Pune because of the compassion of Radheshyam Prabhu. We're all feeling protected in ISKCON because of the protection of Srila Prabhupada. And all of us are feeling protected in devotional service because of the protection of Krishna. So you see, the compassion and protection, they go hand in hand actually. They're actually intrinsically linked. When someone is very protective of somebody else, it is because that person actually has compassion. The demons are just the opposite. When they want to protect something, they do not protect it because they are compassionate. They protect it because of selfish interests. So therefore, protection may be there, but a devotee's protection and the Lord's protection is always defined by that foundation of compassion. That is a very important point for us to remember. Let us look at the protection that Krishna gives us. What does it mean? Because in Prahlad Maharaj pastime, as we all know, Prahlad Maharaj was adequately and fully protected by the Lord at every junction of his life. That's why, Yamaraj, when he was asked, when the messengers of Yamaraj in the 6th canto came back after they got transcendently confused, by the Vishnu Dutas who came and told them to stop taking Ajamil away. When they came back in that discussion, um, so nicely, Yamaraj actually mentioned and described Krishna. He described Krishna as Otam and Protam, horizontal and vertical. So when you look at the dhotis that you all are wearing, and I can see the Pune congregation, you're all wearing dhotis, and I hope everyone else is wearing dhoti. But if you wear dhotis, you'll find one thing very nice. Any cloth, if you look at it very carefully, it is made up of threads that intersect each other. If the quality of these threads that intersect each other is very good, the cloth will not tear easily because the fabric is strong. If the intersection is not strong and the intersection is not there, then the cloth is easily torn. So Krishna is like Otam and Protam. His protection is horizontal, it is vertical, it is in all directions. And the more we are connected to Krishna, that fabric of that cloth of devotional service will actually bind us always to him. And we feel the shelter of his protection. Sometimes, whenever we think of that verse, Paritranaya Sadhunam, very often, we think that Krishna comes purposefully to annihilate the miscreants age after age. But frankly speaking, if we study that verse, and if we study a verse from Shukadev Goswami, that verse is 2:4:13 of Srimad Bhagavatam. In that verse, Shukadev Goswami tells us why the Lord comes and why he comes to do what he wants to do. Bhuyo namasad vrijana chide asatam asambhavaya akhilasadva murtaye pumsam punaha paramahamsyamashrameh vyavastitanam anumrigya dashuse. So Shukadev Goswami says very nicely this point. He says, after offering obeisances to the Lord, he says that Krishna, you are the protector of the pious devotees. So actually Krishna's main function when he descends is to always protect his devotees. That is always the case. When Krishna chastised Kaliya in the 10th canto, his main purpose was not chastisement of Kaliya. Krishna book says very clearly, that his actual purpose was to protect and give relief to the residents of Vrindavan. When he came and gave shelter as Govardhan Hill, his main purpose was to give shelter. The byproduct of that purpose at that same time was to check the pride of Indra, which was also protection. Also protection. So you see, actually, the Lord always descends. He descends into our hearts when we chant the holy names. He descends into our lives when we perform devotional service. But what does he do? He liberates us from the distresses. Very nice point, 2:4:13 tells us. So we don't have to wait to die to become liberated. When we take up Krishna consciousness, even while we are in this world, Krishna can liberate us from distress. And how does he do that? The second part is very important. Akhila Sattva Murtaye. What he does is, he always destroys the further advances of atheistic temperaments. He checks it. So he not only checks the advances of the demons, but if we have any atheistic or demonic tendencies in our heart, by performing devotional service, Krishna actually checks that advance in our heart also. So please, this is the reason why Krishna comes. He's so kind. He's coming to relieve our distress, you see. So the protection of the Lord is very deep and it's very vast. It is not only physical protection of the Lord. Sometimes we pray very hard, rightfully, that Krishna, you please protect me when my health is not good. Yes, Krishna will definitely protect us. But very importantly, the reason why our health goes most of the time is because of the mental anguish and distress that we feel in this world, isn't it? Half the time the body breaks down because the mind is not peaceful. And therefore, Krishna actually really gives protection to our consciousness. He is the one who can remove miserable distresses and conditions. Why? Because Bhagavatam tells us day and night, Krishna is thinking of how to relieve the distress of his devotees. Just see how important it is. The most important thing that we should do is that we should not forget Krishna. He has always promised protection to those who have surrendered to him. The only problem is we have forgotten that his protection is always there. In the 4th canto, 30th chapter, I think it's 24th verse, 4:30-24. The Prachetas, they point out this protection, this protective quality of Krishna. They say, Namo Vishuddha Sadvaya, Haraye Hari Medase, Vasudevaya Krishnaya, Prabhave Sarva Sadvatam. In fact, if you read this verse, what is really interesting is, Prabhupada in the word to word actually states the word Hari Medase to mean Krishna's brain is working only for the deliverance of the conditioned souls. Actually, there's nowhere else, you'll find the word brain being used for Krishna. Krishna's brain is transcendental, by the way. It's not like yours and mine. But his brain is working day and night, Bhagavatam tells us, just thinking of how to deliver the conditioned souls, not just the devotees. Not just the devotees. 4:30:24 clearly tells us that Krishna is always thinking of how to take away the miserable conditions of the devotees. That's Haraye. Then Hari Medase, how to deliver the conditioned souls. See how important this point is. So actually, Krishna is very kind. And you'll notice that when you want to turn to the protection of Krishna, you'll also have to acknowledge that he's very kind. Prabhupada, in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Prabhupada says this nice point. He says that if a devotee sincerely surrenders to Krishna, simply once even, praying, my dear Lord Krishna, from this day I'm yours. Then what happens? Prabhupada guarantees that day when you sincerely surrender, that day Krishna takes you from the clutches of material energy. And the Ramayana confirms this, isn't it? In Yuddha Kanda, Prabhupada also quotes this very important verse, Sakrad eva prapanno yas, tavasmiti cha yachate, abhayam sarvada tasmai, dadami etat vratam mama. Very important. Krishna says there, it is my duty, Lord Ram, it is my duty and vow to do what? To give all protection to one who surrenders unto me without reservation. So to the extent that we are unreserved in our devotional service to Krishna, to that extent his protection is extended. This word unreserved is very important. When you take trains in India, right, hopefully you will get a ticket and you can get on the train. Sometimes you can't get, a ticket. So what do? You just jump on the train, isn't it? There's no train ticket. Everything is unreserved. I remember in the beginning years when I started going to India, my Guru Maharaj actually, he blooded me into Indian lifestyle, specifically on the train. And very often he would actually jump on the train. And I remember, I think Vaishnava Seva Prabhu from Rajkot, he's also online today. We would travel from Mumbai, taking the Saurashtra Express 21, 22 hours all the way to Dwarka. And it's unreserved. So I would say, Maharaj, why can't we actually try and get, reservation? Maharaj said, because if you bought the train in unreserved way, you have to really depend on Krishna, isn't it? You can't depend on your ticket. You have to really depend on Krishna. You may end up sitting next to bathroom. You may end up getting squeezed somewhere. Maybe I'm old man, Maharaj said, they'll give me space, but you're a young man, they'll throw you out. So in that way, Prabhupada translates this Sakrat eva prapannoyas by saying so nicely that we should turn to Krishna without reservation. That is our part to play. The more we want to hold on something, the less we feel his protection. But never doubt that his protection, like rain, is always there. Rain is pouring. Don't fault the rain if the ground is not fertile and the plants cannot grow. Maybe one ground is very fertile, so it receives rainwater very nicely. But if our ground is very hard-hearted and we are very reserved, in the way we are doing devotional service, how can we blame the rain? Rain is coming, isn't it? So this is a very important point for our devotional service. Because sometimes when the difficulties come, we actually start thinking that Krishna is not protecting us. But his protection is there. It goes further actually. It goes further, deeper. Why? Because Bhagavatam also tells us sometimes, even when we come to devotional service, we have so many other previous desires. They catch us, We may have changed the dresses, but the consciousness we may not have changed. So sometimes our devotional service is laced with expectation and fruitive activities, and it's very difficult for us to become pure. And when that happens, right, we don't realize that devotional service should not be about material benedictions. But somehow, sometimes we take it up that way. Dhruva Maharaj was a good example in Bhagavatam. Dhruva Maharaj was very determined to be greater than his father. And we all know the reason why. Yet, Krishna is so kind that even to those who come to Krishna with material desires, he still gives them protection. But his protection takes a different flavor. In the 5th canto, 19th chapter, 27th verse, 5:19-27. There, it is very nicely stated how another form of protection Krishna gives also. Satyam disati artitam artito nrinam naivartado yat punar artita yataha swayam vidate bhajatam anichyatam ichhapidanam nijapada pallavam. This verse is really nice. Lord Krishna will certainly fulfill the desire of his devotees. If they come to him in devotional service, he will fulfill their desires. Dhruva Maharaj came to him in devotional service. And even though after devotional service had changed his heart, he did not want the kingdom, Krishna gave it anyway. But sometimes what happens is, this verse tells us, Krishna does not fulfill desires that would again cause misery. So sometimes if we desire for a cake and we think it's very nice, Krishna may give us a cake. But if every day we want a sweet cake, then tomorrow we'll end up being diabetic. Krishna will take the cake away. So in spite of being materially ambitious, sometimes that devotee is checked by Krishna. And instead of actually giving him whatever he wants over and over again, Krishna takes it away. And Krishna sometimes stops giving it to him. And at that point, Krishna gives him something else. Bhagavatam says Krishna gives him his lotus feet. And sometimes great devotees like Dhruva Maharaj and Bali Maharaj, they come to realize, what was I running after? And how kind Krishna was in the case of Bali Maharaj to take everything away so that I was left with nothing. And I had to surrender to you without reservation. So Krishna also gives protection to those who come to him with material desire. He takes away things in such a way where it's very painful. Protection is a bit painful. But after a while, we understand, this is Krishna, a kind father, a kind father. There's another form of protection Krishna also gives. He also protects those who are envious of him. Generally, we only protect those who are very nice to us. The tendency in this material world, whether you're husband, wife, brother, sister, any relationship, Prabhu, if you're nice to me, I'm nice to you. If you're not very nice to me, why should I be nice to you? This idea of counteraction is very powerful in material world. But Krishna, his protection is so deep and so vast like an ocean that even those who are envious of him, he also is their well-wisher. And who better to tell us this than Bali Maharaj in Bhagavatam? There's a very famous verse my Guru Maharaj liked. 8th canto, 22nd chapter, 5th verse. 8:22:5. This verse stands for the proposition of protection by the Lord to those who are envious of him. And who best to speak it but Bali Maharaj? Tvam nunam asuranam naha paroksha paramo guruhu yononeka madandhanam vibramsham chakshuradisha. It's a really nice verse. And the word to word that's important is that word mother andhanam. It means you're blinded by material opulences. So what actually Bali Maharaj is saying here, he's talking to Vamandev. He says, my dear Vamandev, you are indirectly the greatest well-wisher of all of us demons. You are the greatest well-wisher. Why? You act for our best welfare by posing as if you are our enemy. See, Krishna is transcendently crooked. Bali Maharaj realizes that Krishna is posing as an enemy, but actually he's a well-wisher. Why? Because Bali Maharaj says, demons like us always aspire for a position of false prestige. And by chastising us, you give us the eyes by which to see the right path. This is a very important and sobering point. It should really inspire us to think that Krishna consciousness is really the topmost yoga system. Because there's no one in these three worlds who will still be our well-wisher, even if we are envious, even if we are demonic, Even if we exhibit false prestige, Krishna is so kind that he will chastise us. Like he brought Bali Maharaj to his knees, he will bring us to our knees. And that's why in this material world, sometimes we have a lot of material possessions. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, we become blind to spiritual life. Sometimes you may think, I have renounced everything. I may be brahmachari, I may be a simple devotee, but we may have renounced material possessions tangibly. But have we renounced pride? Have we renounced envy? Have we renounced anger? Have we renounced lust and greed? All these are material possessions. And these material possessions can make us blind to spiritual life. So therefore, Prabhupada writes in the purport that the demons may not actually be praying to Krishna, but Krishna doesn't care. For Krishna, everyone is his children. And therefore, sometimes he takes away the demons' false illusions of false prestige. And that he does, Prabhupada writes in that purport, as a special favor. These are the two words Prabhupada uses, special favor. Of course, for this reason, don't become demon, because you say Krishna is so kind, actually more to the demon. We don't have to do it that way, but it shows us how great Krishna is actually. So actually, we must understand one thing. The three most difficult things we have in our hearts, and Narasimha Dev Chaturdasi is coming. Pride, which leads to envy, and which eventually will manifest as anger. PEA, you know those garden peas, very easy to remember. Krishna will check this pride as part of his protection. He did that to Bali Maharaj. He did that to Indra. So protection of the Lord also means sometimes being deprived of our position, sometimes being deprived of our designation. And this will induce in us a feeling of helplessness, dependence, and humility. Remember the no reservation on the train? Really helpless. We really have to pray to Krishna. And the final point on protection that I can think of at this moment is that the protection of the Supreme Lord actually also comes in the form of the stringent laws of material nature. This one is a very difficult protection. The stringent laws of material nature, they operate when we do not take shelter of the internal potency of the Lord. And when we think that we are the makers of our destiny, then the karmas will come on us actually. But we don't realize that when we don't behave as the Lord would want us to behave, when we hurt others, when we are not compassionate to others, then we don't realize that we have actually lost the protection of the Lord, not in the positive, not in the sense that he has not protected us, but now he has to put us through material nature to make us learn to come out of this. This is a very indirect, but it is a very powerful protection. And sometimes we don't see it. We complain, why are we being tested? Why are we being put through difficulty? But we should really become humble to realize that somewhere along the line, we have behaved in such a way that the Lord has deemed it fit through material nature, through the slaps of Maya, so to speak, to wake us up actually. Actually, this nice point was given by Brahmaji to Lord Shiva. You know, if you remember in the 4th canto, 6th chapter, Lord Shiva became very upset with Daksha because Sati actually burned herself because of the insult she could not withstand, you know. So then remember, Daksha's head was cut off by Virabhadra, and Lord Shiva was still very upset. Nobody dared to approach Lord Shiva to pacify him because Daksha had to continue. He was also part of this universe. So Brahmaji then decided to go with the Devatas and they pacified Lord Shiva. One verse Brahmaji speaks about shows us this important concept of protection. It's in the 4th canto, 6th chapter, 47th verse. Very important verse, 4, 6, 47. Pritagdiya karma drisho durashayaha parodayena hrid rujo nisham paranduruktai vidudonti aruntudas tanma vadidaiva vadhan bhavadvidaha. So Brahmaji is now talking to Lord Shiva. He says to him, my dear Lord Shiva, persons who observe everything with a differential attitude, persons who are attached simply to fruitive activities, persons who are very mean-minded, persons who are pained to see the flourishing condition of others, and who thus give distress to others by uttering harsh and piercing words. These people are already killed by providence. They are destroyed by the force of providence, who is non-different from Krishna. Therefore, there is no need for us to kill them again, because Krishna takes care of these persons through the stringent laws of material nature. So this is a very important point, because it is sometimes by the powerful force of material nature that sometimes we turn to Krishna out of desperation. And that is also his protection. So you can see in all different ways in this universe, we can see how the hand of Krishna is in all the different phases of protection, how he protects pure devotees, how he protects devotees who are not so pure but who are taking up devotional service, how he is the well-wisher of the demons, how he checks the false prestige, how he, without reservation, will give himself to one who has surrendered, and how for the living entities who have no conception of God, how through the process of material nature, he actually checks them and gradually elevates them. This is Krishna. And Krishna never does anything alone. If you talk about Krishna, it's a package deal. Whenever we talk about Krishna, there must be devotees. And so whenever Krishna protects, devotees also protect. So the conclusion to this part of the discussion today on protection of the Lord is very clear. Our behavior will finally attract Krishna's protection in all the different ways. That's why Bhagavatam is so much about behavior. Bhagavatam is B and behavior is B. It is, what is the point of learning so many shlokas and studying it with mundane scholarship if ultimately we cannot put Bhagavatam into practice? 70% of Bhagavatam is composed actually of how devotees behaved. They prayed very hard, and after praying, they always behaved, and they conducted themselves according to their prayers. That's why we are so convinced when we read Bhagavatam, because what they say and what they did is aligned. So, behavior of a devotee or a living entity will always attract the Lord, either through his mercy or through the stringent laws of material nature. Do not forget, Prabhu said, Mataji, that Krishna is time. And because he is time, if we take shelter of him, he will give us the time to destroy demonic tendencies in our hearts. He will. So we should be very careful not to think that just because we are now devotees, we should designate ourselves as devotees and forget to behave ourselves as devotees. Very important. The Lord is in everyone's heart. The Lord sees everything. And because we're talking about Narasimha Dev pastime, the Lord is in everything. He's in the pillar, isn't it? That's why he demonstrated that to Hiranyakashipu. So he's everywhere. He's everywhere. Someone asked me if Krishna is in Zoom, and I said he's definitely in Zoom also. Is he in YouTube? He's also in YouTube. Anywhere, Krishna's presence is pervading, animate in and inanimate. So please, we must understand that Krishna is the supreme protector. And therefore, he is the supreme compassionate. Because only when one is compassionate can one actually give protection. Which now brings us to the second part of our discussion today. The first part was about the supreme protection of the Lord and understanding that his protection is premised on compassion. Now let us understand, how does a devotee exhibit compassion? And this is Narasimha Dev Chaturdasi. So who better for us to focus our spotlight on than the great Prahlad Maharaj, who is the embodiment of compassion. And through Prahlad Maharaj and so many beautiful shlokas from Bhagavatam, Krishna willing, today we will be all able to share and learn so much more about compassion. Prahlad Maharaj, is the emblem of compassion. If you have read any parts of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writings, especially in Jaiva Dharma, for example, and in other writings quoted sometimes, you'll find that Bhaktivinoda Thakur defined compassion very nicely. He says that one should be merciful and not cause anxiety for other living entities. This is very important. It's a simple test actually, Yasman nod vijate loko, lokan nod vijate chayaha. 12th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita, right? One of the great characteristics of a devotee, which is actually compassion, but it's exhibited by, are we causing difficulty to others? If your answer is, I'm not causing difficulty, but others are causing me difficulty, so what to do? I have to cause difficulty. Then we are actually very difficult. But the point is, others may cause difficulty to us. But the question we must ask, are we causing others difficulty? Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the heart of a devotee should always be filled with compassion for others. And exhibiting mercy to all living entities is one of the limbs of devotional service. This is very important. The other point that's really nice that Bhaktivinoda Thakur brings up is, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that compassion is a natural human sentiment, but it finds its highest expression in the works of devotees of the Lord. The tenderness of the heart experienced towards Krishna is known as bhakti. What a nice definition. Huh? The tenderness of heart that we have for Krishna is actually bhakti. Now Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, all other jivas are servants of Krishna. So when one experiences tenderness of heart towards them, that is known as daya. That is compassion. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur concludes, compassion is included within bhakti. Very important point. Compassion is included within bhakti. Srila Prabhupada builds on the acharyas in the Nectar of Devotion. And there he says, a person who is unable to bear another's distress is called compassionate. If we can really bear someone suffering because of us, we really have to look at how much compassion we have. If we say, yes, you deserve it because you criticized me or you spoke to me this way. See, Krishna has taken care of you. Something is seriously wrong with the way we are seeing things. So Prabhupada says in Nectar of Devotion, if we cannot tolerate that others are in difficulty, then it doesn't matter if we are in difficulty, but we will serve them. And that is compassion. And Srila Prabhupada, no one showed that more than Prabhupada. And no one showed that more than Prahlad Maharaj. But generally, Prabhupada writes in Nectar of Devotion, because people are always too much focused on their own interests. See how nice Prabhupada says. The reason why compassion is not in our hearts is when we are very focused on our own interests. And we are so focused on our own interests, we cannot concern ourselves with the distress of others. But the devotee is focused on Krishna's interests. And because Krishna's interest is paramount, and everyone is part and parcel of Krishna, the devotee is therefore naturally compassionate. Very important point. You'll also find in Bhagavatam, Prabhus and Matajis, that compassion has many cousins, that comes with it. Sometimes you go to a house, you come with a whole group, isn't it? Compassion is like that. It has many cousins. At the root of compassion is actually genuine humility. What is that humility based on? That who am I after all? I'm just a part and parcel of Krishna, and so is everyone. So humility is there. The second point is, if everyone is part and parcel of Krishna, should we not tolerate other people's behavior? Because they are also suffering in this material world. So tolerance is the second cousin that comes. And once we have tolerance, then what happens is we will always be well-wishers of everyone. And therefore, there will be the lack of envy, which is the third cousin. We will not feel envy to others. And on the contrary, we will be well-wishers. And then when there's no envy, there's no pride. Because pride always is the harbinger of envy. When you're proud of who you are, and you think someone is threatening your position, that's when you become envious of that person. If you think I'm actually not so good in this, but someone is very good, you'll never feel envious. So then you will never be angry also. So no pride, no anger, and no envy. And all this is premised on that last cousin, which is very important, that a devotee sees the hand of Krishna at every juncture of his life. Therefore, he's not envious that Krishna has given someone something else. He's given me something else. No. When Sudama left Dwarka for Porbandar, he never compared himself to anyone. Oh, Krishna has given so much to others. He never gave me anything. He said, I deserve what I get. And that's why when he went back, Krishna gave him everything that he did not want. So this is how compassion is not just something that exists alone. It exists with so many other qualities also. And all these qualities were found in Prahlad Maharaj. All of these. So we must remember Prahlad Maharaj today. And now for the next 15 minutes or so, let's try and absorb ourselves in Prahlad Maharaj. In the 7th canto, 4th chapter, 30th verse, Prahlad Maharaj is described as Mahan Tesham Gunai. Gunai means qualities. Mahan Tesham means the reservoir of transcendental qualities. So Bhagavatam starts in this episode by telling us that Prahlad Maharaj was born as the reservoir of transcendental qualities. Why? Because Bhagavatam tells us that he was an unalloyed devotee of the Lord. This is very important. You can see, that in the 7th canto, 4th chapter, 31st and 32nd verse, there are so many wonderful examples of his characteristics that are given. We don't have time to go through that, but in your own free time, please go through these verses. In that verse of 31 and 32, very nicely, the qualities of Prahlad Maharaj are given. Prahlad Maharaj was said to be a person of good character. He was determined to understand the absolute truth. He had full control of the senses and the mind. And he was the best friend of everyone. This is the starting point of compassion. When a compassionate person is best friend of everyone. And how was he best friend? He was very, very mature in his relationship with everyone. Bhagavatam tells us, to the respectable persons, he acted like a menial servant. So nice, huh? To the respectable person, he was like a menial servant. To the poor, he was just like a father. To the equals, he was attached like a sympathetic brother. And he considered his teachers, his spiritual masters, all these older God brothers to be as good as Krishna. This is very helpful for us, Prabhus and Matajis, because you can see that compassion doesn't mean one stroke fits all or one size fits all. A mature devotee will always relate with each devotee and exercise compassion in the way of that relationship. And that is very important. Why? Because Prahlad Maharaj was actually completely free of unnatural pride. Very nice point. There was no unnatural pride about him. He was not very proud of his good looks, his riches, his aristocracy, his beauty. Prabhupada says no, he was not. So from all this, you can also understand that Prahlad Maharaj must have been a very handsome boy. He must have been very rich. He must have been very educated. He was definitely aristocratic. But these things did not make him proud. And that's why he could be compassionate. The significant point of Prahlad Maharaj's compassion actually comes in the 7th canto, 5th chapter. And it's 755, very easy to remember, 755. Because that's the part Hiranyakashipu one day affectionately put Prahlad on his lap. He smelled the top of his boy's head and he appeared very compassionate. Hiranyakashipu also can appear compassionate. At this point, he looked like a very kind father. And then he asked the question, of all the subjects you learned, Prahlad, what's the best of all the subjects you have learned? Tell me. You've been learning from Sukracharya's two sons, right? Sanda and Amarka. So now tell me what it is. But instead of telling him all the topics of politics and everything else that he learned, Prahlad Maharaj, very brave boy, he then said something very interesting. He advised his father in a very polite way, but he was preaching. Tat sadhu manye suravarya dehinam sada samudvigna diyama sadgraha hidvadma patam grahamanda kupam vanam gato yat darimashrayetaha. So here he gives a very nice point, He says, oh, best of the asuras, oh, king of the demons, as far as I've learned from my spiritual master, and this is not Shanda and Amarka, any person who has accepted a temporary body and temporary household life is certainly going to be embarrassed by anxiety because of having fallen into the dark well. There is no water in that well, so you will only suffer. So please, my dear father, please give up this position and go to the forest. Prabhupada writes in the purport that Prahlad Maharaj was actually telling Hiranyakashipu, you should retire now because you have gotten everything. Now find out the goal of life and take shelter of Krishna. See how important this point is. Now, the moment he said that, of course, Hiranyakashipu, forgot all his compassion. He forgot it. And he became very upset. And at that point, he turned again to Sanda and Amarka and said, I'm giving you another chance. Take him back and make him learn what he should learn. And understand where he has got all these Krishna consciousness principles. There's a leak somewhere. Someone is speaking about this somewhere. So Prahlad Maharaj was spared, but that was the start of his compassion. Prabhupada writes in many parts of Bhagavatam, a devotee's compassion comes through his genuine preaching. Wherever a devotee has an opportunity to speak about Krishna, to alleviate the condition of anguish and anxiety, he will do it. And that is a sign of compassion. In the 7th canto, 5th chapter, in the 12th verse, we find that when Sanda and Amarka sat down with him and asked him, what is this? Who taught you all this? And then they started teaching him politics, right? That's the point Prahlad Maharaj actually became upset. He did not like politics because Prabhupada defines politics as, politics means you have to distinguish between friends and enemies. What an interesting point of definition of politics. Politics means I must distinguish who is on my side and who's not on my side. You're on my side, very good. You're not on my side, out. So a devotee is naturally compassionate. And therefore, a deep point of compassion that Prahlad Maharaj had is that a devotee does not make distinctions between enemies, friends, and himself. And this is what he now preached to Sanda and Amarka. In 7.5.12, he told them, Sayadanu vrita pumsam pashu buddhi vibidyate anya esha tatanyo aham iti bheda gatha sati. The translation is very nice. He's telling them, when Krishna becomes pleased with the living entities because of devotional service, one can become a pandita. And then he does not make distinctions between enemies, friends, and himself. Intelligently, he starts thinking, every one of us is an eternal servant of God. Therefore, we're not very different from each other. This is the starting point in our attitude to develop compassion in our heart. It's very important. Prabhupada writes in that purport that demons think of everyone as either a friend or enemy. But Vaishnavas say that since everyone is a servant of the Lord, then everyone is on the same platform. Therefore, a Vaishnava like Prahlad Maharaj treats all living entities neither as friends nor as enemies. This is very important. So you may ask, or we may ask, if I don't treat someone, a devotee, who's sitting next to me as my friend, not as my enemy, then what am I treating him as? When you treat someone as friend, as an enemy, it is self-serving. It's political. Rather, when we see everyone as part and parcel of Krishna, instead of being caught up with either being friendly or inimical, we should just have the attitude of serving them. When we sincerely want to serve the living entities, we transcend this idea of being friendly or being inimical. Then we serve everyone because they are all servants of the Lord. But they are wasting valuable life, as Prahlad Maharaj said. And this is very important. In that 7.5.12 that I shared with you, the last paragraph of Srila Prabhupada's purport is very important to understand the compassion of Prahlad Maharaj and all of us. Prabhupada writes emphatically, everyone should be friendly for the service of the Lord. Everyone should praise another's service to the Lord and not be proud of his own service. This is the way of Vaishnava thinking. This is Vaikuntha thinking. There may be rivalries, there may be apparent competition between servants in performing service, but in the Vaikuntha planets, the service of another servant is appreciated. It's not condemned. This is Vaikuntha competition. There is no question of enmity between servants. Everyone should be allowed to render service to the Lord to the best of his ability. And everyone should appreciate the service of others. Such are the activities of Vaikuntha. See, this is so nice a point. And this is how Prahlad Maharaj showed his compassion. Now we come to the next part. When Sanda and Amarka tried so hard to teach Prahlad Maharaj all the rules of politics, and he kept resisting it and teaching them about compassion, they then became upset. And they threatened Prahlad with bodily harm. They took a stick. But the important thing is this: even when they took a stick, Prahlad Maharaj did not move from his compassion to preach Krishna consciousness to them. He did not. Therefore, we must learn one thing from Prahlad Maharaj. Genuine compassion, Prabhus and Matajis, is not conditional on how living entities treat us. It's very important. Whether it is with sweet words or with a stick, our compassion for living entities is not premised on how they treat us. Genuine compassion must be free of the judgment of others, or even the praise or blasphemy of others. If you think this is just talk, Bhagavatam has it down. In the 7th canto, 13th chapter, 42nd verse, the Avadut whom Prahlad Maharaj himself looks to and asks this question gives us a super excellent way to live in this world. Naham ninde nachastaumi swabhava vishamam jamam etesham shreya asha se utai katmyam mahatmani. The translation is beautiful. Different people are of different mentalities. Different people are of different mentalities. This is the starting point of this shloka, and this is the royal road to becoming compassionate. Very important. 7, 13, 42. Okay? So different people are of different mentalities. Therefore, it is not my business to either praise them or blaspheme them. I only desire their welfare, and I hope that they will agree to become aligned with the super soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This was the compassion of Prabhupada. This is the compassion of Prahlad Maharaj. So after Sanda and Amarka tried very hard with him, but he was transcendently stubborn, they brought him back again. They brought him back again to see his father. And this time what happened? Prahlad Maharaj sat down again on the lap of Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu thought, I'm sure my two teachers have brainwashed this boy and stopped him from thinking such thoughts about Krishna and being compassionate. So then again he asked him, please tell me now, what have you learned? So Prabhupada writes in the purport that when Hiranyakashipu asked this question, he was probably thinking that, he's a child. He's not going to give me some elaborate answer. He's probably going to tell me something more pleasing than instructive. But what did Prahlad Maharaj do? Out of compassion, he actually gives another nice preaching point to his father. Shravanam kirtanam vishnuho smaranam padasevanam archanam vandanam dasyam sakyam atmanivedanam. Just see, this is what he told him. And so again, he was requesting his father that, my dear father, the best way to move forward in life is if you please take up this devotional service. He didn't speak in a rude way. He was mild and gentle. But Hiranyakashipu's response to Prahlad Maharaj was the opposite of compassion. Why? He was driven by pride. He was driven by envy. Sometimes we may think, I'm of a higher position than you are. How dare you preach to me? Sometimes as parents also, we think, oh, children are telling us something. How can we hear them? But a true devotee, who has really humility in their heart, they will hear, because they recognize that whatever that's coming through anyone about Krishna is always valuable. This is the mood of a devotee. But unfortunately, Hiranyakashipu was not very compassionate. He was driven by envy, and he could not take it that now the envy was not of Prahlad Maharaj. The envy was, Prahlad Maharaj has gone to the camp of my sworn enemy, Vishnu. That's where the envy started. So you see, Prabhupada is right when he writes very often that we came into this world because we are envious of Krishna. Today we may think, no, I'm really not envious of Krishna. But then if you really think carefully, the reason why we want to exploit everything in this world for ourselves is because we cannot accept that it actually belongs to Krishna. And when we can't accept it, actually we are envious. And that's why envy is so powerful. And when we are envious of someone, it is very difficult to be compassionate to that person. So then what happened? Hiranyakashipu became very upset. In that chapter, Prabhupada translates, he said that this Prahlad appears to be a friend of mine, but he's actually an enemy that I cannot control. If you're compassionate, you will relinquish control. This is another point that's very important. The more controlling you are of this world, the less compassionate you'll be. Because when you think you can control something, you're proud. When we are proud, we are envious. When we are envious, how to become compassionate? So this point is a very important point we take from Bhagavatam. And at that point of time, Hiranyakashipu did something terrible. He exhibited the complete opposite of compassion. He tried so hard, to get Prahlad Maharaj killed. The tender parts of Prahlad Maharaj were struck by the tridents of his servants. These demons were so fearful. They made tumultuous sounds. They said, chop him up and pierce him. They struck Prahlad Maharaj. But how did Prahlad Maharaj respond? He was silent. He was meditating on Krishna because he had faith in Krishna. He had faith in the protection of Krishna. So the weapons of these demons were very powerful, Prabhupada translates in text 41 of the same chapter. But because of Prahlad Maharaj's devotional service, Narasimha, the Lord, before he appeared, he was already protecting Prahlad. So it's very important that while Narasimha appeared in that form from the pillar, we realize actually that he had already appeared in the heart of Prahlad Maharaj through all these trials and tribulations. Why? Because he was very attracted to Prahlad Maharaj's compassion and love for his father, because he never got upset with his father. And when all these attempts were tried, then he tried other things. I think he tried throwing him into a pit full of fearful snakes. He tried using spells on him. He tried to hurl him from the top of a hill. He conjured up illusory tricks. He administered poison to Prahlad. He tried to starve him. He exposed him to severe cold, winds, fire, water. He threw heavy stones to crush him. But none of this could harm Prahlad Maharaj because he was sinless. And who became anxious? Hiranyakashipu became anxious because he was not compassionate. When you are naturally compassionate in devotional service, we are not anxious because we are not envious of anyone. And now Hiranyakashipu thought, I have tried so many things to chastise this boy. I have devised so many means to kill him. But despite all my endeavor, he cannot be killed. Indeed, he has saved himself by his own powers. He's not been affected by these treacheries and abominable actions. He's very near to me. He's my son. He looks like a child, but he's completely fearless. Fearless. He resembles a dog's curved tail. It can never be straightened because no matter what happens, he never forgets his connection with his master, Lord Vishnu. Never forgets. Now, for the first time, Hiranyakashipu's lack of compassion caused deep fear in him. He now began to say, I can see that this boy's strength is unlimited. He doesn't fear my punishments. Because of my enmity towards him, I may die. And then he sat down, and he became morose at that point. So you can see that when a devotee is free of envy and who is a well-wisher, Krishna's protection actually falls on that devotee. That's the connection between the protection of the Lord and the compassion of the devotee. This is the junction that we are talking about. What was Prahlad's response to all this? The response is actually not quoted in the 7th canto. It's quoted in a very famous verse that describes Parikshit Maharaj, but also describes Prahlad Maharaj. 1:1848. Tiraskritta vipralabdha, shapta shipta hata hapi, nasya tad pratikurvanti, tad bhaktaha prabhavopihi. Very nicely it is stated there. The devotees of the Lord are so forbearing. They can tolerate anything, even if they are defamed, even if they are cheated, even if they are cursed, even if they are disturbed, even if they are neglected, even if they are killed, they will not avenge themselves. They won't. This is the greatness of devotees. Why? Because first of all, Prahlad Maharaj was compassionate to his father. And second, He had full faith in Krishna. This is the greatness of devotees. Sometimes in our life, in devotional service, Prabhu's Mataji's, sometimes in our life, people will look down on us. Sometimes people may defame us. Sometimes people may cheat us. Sometimes we are cursed, people get angry with us unnecessarily, maybe they curse us. Sometimes they disturb us. Sometimes the worst thing is they neglect us, they actually, worse than disturbance is neglect. If someone doesn't talk to you for 3 days, that neglect is very painful. It is very painful. And sometimes, like Prahlad Maharaj case, they want to kill us. But in all these cases, no counteraction is the best counteraction. Why? Because that is the royal road to remember Krishna and be under his protection. And this is how Prahlad Maharaj's mind was. So this is the greatness of Prahlad Maharaj's compassion. Now we also look at another aspect where Prahlad Maharaj showed his compassion. He showed it to all his demonic playmates. If you remember, they all sat down after the lessons, and when Prahlad Maharaj saw the teachers had left, he decided, let me share Krishna consciousness with them. That is also compassion. So they wanted to play, but Prahlad Maharaj said, let me give you something else which is much more wonderful. And he preached about Krishna consciousness to them. But this is very important. When they asked him about how come you are so advanced and how come you have learned so much, he then said, all that I've learned is from the compassion of Narada Muni. So you see, this Prahlad Maharaj's compassion story, there is another story of compassion within the compassion story. This is a very important point of compassion. Compassion is not just self-taught. It is often gifted by another great devotee to another devotee. Please remember this principle. Compassion is always gifted through sadhu sangha. That's why we take sadhu sangha in this movement. Prahlad Maharaj explained to his classmates that Narada Muni so kindly took his mother and him as an unborn child under his protection and compassionately gave him Bhagavatam. And because of that compassion, Prahlad Maharaj is here today. So Narada Muni's compassion was what gave Prahlad Maharaj compassion. See how important this aspect of compassion is? And Narada Muni was compassionate. Why? Because he was also the recipient of compassion. If not for the Bhakti Vedantas who gave him prasadam, remnants of Mahaprasad, and if not for their wonderful compassion for giving him Bhagavatam through the time they were there in Chaturmasya, he would not have got their compassion. See how important compassion is. When you receive compassion through Krishna, share it with others. It doesn't matter if they understand it or not, but we serve them with compassion. And that compassion will seep into their hearts. And then they will also share it with someone. And now because of Prahlad Maharaj's compassion, which came from Narada Muni's compassion, which came from Bhakti Vedanta's compassion, today through Srila Prabhupada's compassion, we are also hoping to be compassionate when we speak about Krishna. This is amazing. And now the final test for Prahlad Maharaj's compassion was actually shown when Hiranyakashipu took up that sword to kill him. And Prahlad Maharaj's reaction to his father at that time is very instructive. When you have time, look at 7th canto, 8th chapter, 3rd and 4th verse. Very important. In that translation, when Hiranyakashipu understood this terrible situation, he became very angry because he realized now that his son Prahlad would never change. And he became very cruel, and he was hissing like a snake that is trampled under by someone's foot. But what was Prahlad Maharaj's response to that? Bhagavatam tells us his son Prahlad was peaceful, mild, and gentle. Very nice. PMG. He was peaceful, he was mild, and he was gentle. And all of these, right, are symptoms of one who's compassionate. And why was he PMG? Because his senses were under control. And why were his senses under control? Because his devotional service was sincere. And therefore, he stood in front of Hiranyakashipu not defiant, but with folded hands. Can you imagine? 7834 Bhagavatam tells us, he stood before his father with folded hands. He didn't say, he didn't scream, you're going to kill me. Krishna, please help me. No, he just stood there with folded hands. And that's why Prabhupada quotes 10:4 of Srimad Bhagavatam to warn us of an important point. Ayuhu shriyam yasho dharmam lokan ashisha evacha hanti shreyamsi sarvani pumso mahad atikrama. When one mistreats great souls, his lifespan, his opulence, his reputation, his religion, his possessions, and his good fortunes, they're all destroyed. Very important point. When we cannot exercise compassion because of envy, at some point we run the risk of mistreating great souls. We may ask, who's a great soul? Prabhupada was asked the question, who is a pure devotee? And Prabhupada said, rascal, except for you, everyone else is a pure devotee. That's what he said. So we must be very careful. Do we know who a great soul is? And if we don't, isn't it important for us to treat all devotees and all living entities in a very careful, respectful, and compassionate manner? Because if we don't, then we may think, why is my devotional service not growing? Why is it I seem to be chanting, but I always have problems? Because we lack compassion and we have not seen the hand of Krishna in all this. So this is very important. So the pastime concludes by saying that Prahlad Maharaj was fearless because he was not discriminating and he was compassionate to all. And he was not proud because he turned to his father and said, my dear father, I am not the one who's very strong. Please, I'm not. The source of my strength is also the source of your strength. That very famous verse, na kevalam me bhavatascha rajan, that whatever I have, you also have. My strength is your strength also. And when he said that, this is what really pleased Krishna. And that's why when Hiranyakashipu demanded that, really, is your Krishna here? Is he in the pillar? That is the time the Lord, who is supreme compassionate and supreme protective, he appeared to give compassion to Hiranyakashipu because of the compassion of Prahlad Maharaj. And so even though Hiranyakashipu was torn apart, so to speak, by Narasimhadev, Bhagavatam tells us just by Hiranyakashipu touching the lap of Narasimhadev, he was actually already purified. He was. But the beauty is, when Prahlad Maharaj finally was asked by Narasimhadev in the 7th canto, 10th chapter, he was asked, ask me a boon, anything you want, tell me. But Prahlad Maharaj only had one thing to ask him. And this is very important. In 7.10, 15 to 17, 7.10, 15 to 17, he says this very important thing. Prahlad Maharaj says, my dear father, you are so merciful to the fallen souls. Supreme Lord, you are so merciful to the fallen souls. I know that my father at the time of his death was purified by your glance on him, was purified by being put on your lap. But he was unnecessarily angry at you. He falsely thought you were the killer of his brother. See how Prahlad Maharaj is speaking. So he directly blasphemed your lordship and he committed heavy sinful actions on you. But I pray, I wish that he be excused for these sinful activities. This is a very important point. As a Vaishnava son, Prabhupada says, despite all the inconveniences imposed upon him by his father, Prahlad Maharaj could not forget his father's affection. It's in the purport. You may ask, and I may ask, what affection? But Prahlad Maharaj considered even the act of the son of him being put on the lap of Hiranyakashipu as a sign of some affection. See, a devotee always tries to see good. And just taking that, it is said, in some purport, I forget, I think it's in the Aho Bakiyam verse, in that purport, Prabhupada says the quality of a noble man is that he can take nectar even from a stalk of poison. He can take nectar from a stalk of poison. Why? Because he's compassionate. He is compassionate. So now let us conclude today. What are the things we can learn from this wonderful episode of the protection of the Lord and the compassion of his devotee? One of the most important things we can learn is how compassionate Prahlad Maharaj is. At the end of it, we must not forget how he felt. When Hiranyakashipu appeared before him in the 9th chapter, Prahlad Maharaj's famous prayers in the 7th canto, 9th chapter, he tells Narasimha Dev, Naivo dvije para duratyaya vaitaranyas, Tvad virya gayana mahamrita magana chittaha, soche tato vimukha chetasa indriyartha, maya sukhaya bharam udvahato vimudan. What does he say? He says, my concern is not for myself. My concern is for the fools and the rascals who are making elaborate plans for material happiness. I am simply concerned with love for them. This is the mood of a devotee. And this same mood was found in Ranti Deva in the 9th canto, 21st chapter, 12th verse. Na kamayeham gatimishwarat param astardiyuktam apunarbhavam va artim prapadye akila deha bhajam antarstisto yena bhavanti adukkaha. Ranti Deva says so nicely, I do not pray to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the 8 perfections of mystic yoga, nor for salvation from repeated birth and death. I want only to stay among the living entities and suffer all distresses on their behalf, so that they may be freed from suffering. This is the mood of a devotee. And Prabhupada says so nicely that forgiveness is a quality of those who are advancing in spiritual life. When we want to be compassionate to devotees, to others, we must always remember that we are instruments of Krishna. We cannot be proud and say, oh, Prabhu, I'm very compassionate to you. That's not compassion. Compassion means we have to be ready to serve them. We should also ignore discrepancies because we also have discrepancies. Very often when we see discrepancies in others is because we have them ourselves. And we should always remember the example of Mother Earth in the 11th canto, 7th chapter, 37th verse. Bhutai akramyamano api, diro daivo vasa anugai, tadvidvan na chalen margad, anvasiksham shite vratam. A sober person, even when harassed by other beings, will understand that his aggressors are acting helplessly under the control of God. So he will never be distracted from the progress of his bhakti. He will understand that when living entities are harassing me, it is not completely because of them. It is because they are also being harassed by the modes of nature. And that is why Prahlad Maharaj could preach to his teachers. He could bring Krishna consciousness to his classmates. He could bring Krishna consciousness to even his father. And later on, he would bring Krishna consciousness to all the residents in Jambudvip. And this is the greatness of Prahlad Maharaj. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai Shla Gurudev ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Thank you very much, Radhesham Prabhu. And thank you very much to all the exalted devotees from Pune congregation. Our obeisances to you and our obeisances to all the devotees today. You have put us all in the right mood to remember about Lord Narasimha Dev. And I thank you for engaging me in this endeavor.
But how will I continue? Hare Krishna? Yeah, yeah.
I can hear you now, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. So, Prabhuji, like, thank you for your wonderful class. You talked about different kinds. So, Prabhuji, like, for a sadhaka, So how does the Lord protect? Like, because we see in case of many sadhaka devotees, right, they are doing all the practices of bhakti, and year after year they are doing, but they don't get to get that higher taste, and sometimes they become hopeless, and we see some of them they leave, or they're not they take to material practices. So how to see the protection of the Lord for these sadhakas?
That's a really nice question, Prabhu. When a devotee or a sadhaka comes to Krishna consciousness, it's very important for us to understand that anyone who comes to Krishna consciousness and even touches it at a certain point of time, whether tasting a drop of nectar or plunging into the ocean of that nectar, that sadhaka is already benefited, Prabhu. That's the starting point we must understand. Even if a sadhaka, for whatever reason, may at some point lose his faith, or at some point think why Krishna consciousness is taking so long, our duty, if we are giving him sadhu sangha, or if we know him, is to try very hard with compassion to serve him and make him understand that in Krishna consciousness, patience, confidence, and enthusiasm are three very important qualities. And these are the qualities that will pave the road for us to walk in devotional service. Patience means that Krishna consciousness may in the beginning, suddenly when we take it, it may ignite like a fire. But we have to be patient that because so many millions of lives of conditioning are there, that fire sometimes may appear smaller and sometimes it may appear bigger. But if we request devotees to be patient and understand that after a lifetime or lifetimes of not remembering Krishna, surely, now that we have got taste of Krishna and we have got a glimpse of the right way to move forward, surely by being confident of the process, by understanding that many things that we think we know about ourselves, we have to leave it to Krishna. Sometimes sadhakas get into the situation where they want to see tangible progress. And sometimes that's a material idea because, when we grow up in this material world, everything has what you call KPIs and everything is measured. But we don't understand that in devotional service, we are not qualified to measure our own devotional service. Only the qualified devotees can measure our devotional service. One thing I can share with you, Prabhu, I remember my Guru Maharaj telling me this when I asked him this question, was that he said, when you are in the plane and the plane is just taking off, at that point, Devaki, you will find the acceleration of the plane, you can feel it. And when you look at the sign, you will see, oh, the plane's speed is really fast, 400, 500 kilometers per hour. You can sense the speed and you become very enthused because you feel the plane is going very fast. But once the plane reaches a certain height and it starts cruising, you could be forgiven for thinking that the plane is not moving because the plane seems to be just floating. And when you look down and see the world, you think, my God, why are we going so slow? Because you don't see the speed. But when you look at the statistics, you realize the plane at cruising altitude is actually just as fast, if not faster, than when it's taking off. Devotional service is like that. In the very beginning, like everything else, the enthusiasm propels us and we think, we are making progress. But because of material designations, we think we should measure devotional service based on material progress. But we don't realize that devotional service has a lot of cleansing. Cleansing means there must be some testing. When we are all checking into the hospital, as Srila Prabhupada said, that's what we are doing. We are admitting we have a disease. Patients in hospital are not jumping up and down like healthy people, isn't it? They are undergoing medication. They need some time. They walk a little slowly. Sometimes they're out of bed. Sometimes they're back in bed. But the important thing is they know that they are sick. And once we understand that we know we are diseased, then progress is already being made. Does that help, Prabhu? At least to give us a framework of how we should change the attitude of the frustrated or sad sadhaka.
Krishna, thank you, Prabhuji, for the wonderful explanation, giving that plain example. Prabhuji, but we also hear from Srila Prabhupada that you don't need a certificate, right? You can test how you're making advancement or not. You don't need anyone to tell. right? Ki our lust will decrease and all these things. So Prabhupada would say that yes, a sadhaka can know whether he's making progress or not. So how to understand this in this context?
When Prabhupada says that you can understand you're making progress, Prabhupada very often compared that also to the taste of food. Prabhupada said, when you taste food, you will know whether it is all right or not. So if you're sincerely performing devotional service, you will gain taste. But in the beginning, because of material conditioning, we need guidance from our Siksha gurus, our Diksha gurus, to give us the faith that at the moment, in the beginning, we may not have taste, but we should persevere with the process. So this is where Prabhu, living in a company of devotees will help us to encourage that sometimes our senses are defective. We may not be able to understand everything immediately. And that is why every devotee requires the nice sadhu association, because when these problems come, he can just he can discuss it with senior devotees and he can be guided. When nectar of instruction, Rupa Goswami tells us we must be patient. What is the implication of patient? It means that even though we have taken up devotional service, there will sometimes be obstacles due to past anarthas. These points Prabhupada also extensively covers in his purports. So it is actually a balanced approach that's very important. The other thing that's very helpful for devotees when they feel very sad or very discouraged is to look at the last line of the 3rd chapter, 31st verse of Bhagavad-Gita. Because in the 3rd chapter, 31st verse of Bhagavad-Gita, Prabhupada writes an amazing purport. I don't have it right here with me, but he says something to the effect that even though one in the beginning, may not be able to make advancement in Krishna consciousness or even have taste, for example, but the important thing is one should not be, as long as one is not resentful of the principles of Krishna consciousness, and he perseveres without hopelessness of defeat. This is very important. Without consideration of hopelessness and defeat, then he will surely at some point of time attain liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So I think that is something that we should really take to heart, because our founder Acharya is recognizing that we will have challenges, but he's also telling us, don't be resentful of the principles. Even if sometimes we cannot accept it practically, Prabhupada told many disciples, at least theoretically you accept it. And then you work on it on the basis of faith. But faith can only grow, Prabhu, if all of us give each other that sadhu sangha. Does that help, Prabhu?
Yes, Devakinandan, thank you for such a beautiful class today. Many of actually in our temple, all devotees have started Bhakti Vaibhava or Bhakti Vedanta courses now. They're all attending now. So some devotees have a question on how you remember the verse numbers so precisely, and do you note down in a notebook or somewhere, and you memorize them? So they want to know more about that.
Okay. Yes, Prabhu. Actually, that's how we were actually instructed by His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj. He told us always that daily we should be reading we should have our daily reading of Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, and there should always be a notebook handy. Whenever there is a verse that touches our heart, and everyone will have a verse that will touch our heart, everyone will have a verse where Bhagavatam, Krishna will speak to us. When there is a verse that's there, then we should write it out very lovingly. Write it. Maharaj, in fact, told me, don't even type it, because type means you're not, you're still a little bit further. But he said, write it. He was very, in that sense, very, he liked that idea of writing. But he said you should commit it down. And when you commit it down, put down the numbers, write it very nicely, learn the word to word, and then spend a day, 2 days, even a week, just memorizing the verse, but not memorizing in the sense of memory work, but understanding it from a word to word transliteration, understanding what the translation is, understanding the purport, and then let your mind and your heart dwell on the verse. Because if the mind doesn't dwell on Krishna long enough, it'll go somewhere else. And since Krishna and the shloka is non-different, then by dwelling your mind on the shloka, Krishna will then reveal the knowledge of what that shloka is about in your practical life. So Maharaj said, if you depend on your own memory, then it's very difficult to remember the shlokas. But if you work hard by writing notebooks, studying the notebooks, or always burying yourself with Bhagavatam, then Krishna will give you the memory at the right time. So that's how Prabhu, in a very succinct way, he told us to study these shlokas actually. So what Maharaj did very often was to tell us that, you can, while you're bathing, you chant. Maharaj in the morning would wake up, and through shaving, he would finish 1-2 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita. Brushing teeth, another 2-3 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita. By the time he started bathing, we would put our ears to the bathroom and we would frantically look through the Bhagavad-Gita to see which point of the verse he was. And he would be moving through 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th chapter. And he said, that's what I did every day. I just chanted the shlokas. And even if you cannot remember anything, even if you remember one shloka, that shloka is Krishna. It will save you at the most difficult time of your life. I hope that's helpful, Radhesham Prabhu.
Nice. And about Lord's protection and devotees' compassion and Prahlad's ideal example, as well as his preaching spirit. Everything was very wonderful, Prabhu, today. If you want to hear more from you, where do we get more of your lectures like this, Prabhu?
I think there is a YouTube channel that has been open. I think the lectures are there, Radhesham Prabhu.
Okay, Prabhu. I'll be thankful if you send me a mail, Prabhu, or tell one of your assistants to send me a mail. It'll be very...
Yeah. I will check the exact
sweet
thing and I will send it. Yeah.
One thing was the pastime which you explained about Prahlad, the preaching to his father and everything. Another thing was very analytically, you brought it down to our level and application points for us, PEA, pride and envy and anger and, and humility, tolerance and all those sublime qualities are very beautifully explained with very nice illustrations and explanations. Prabhu, we are looking forward to hearing you again sometime in future. Again, thank you very much, Prabhu. Let us express our thanks to Prabhu. Loud Hari Bol! Hari Bol! Hari Bol! His Grace Devakinandan Prabhu ki. When you come to India, please remember us, Prabhu. Make one
Definitely,
visit to Pune.
Radhesham Prabhu. Definitely. And thank you all devotees. I'm seeing the brahmacharis and the devotees in Pune. Your faces are glowing because of your sadhana. So please pray for us. Please pray for us. And never be discouraged in devotional service. Never feel discouraged. Devotional service is so powerful. And Krishna is real. He's more real than you and me. We are not real, but he is very real. So we should always be very happy. The worst that can happen, my Guru Maharaj said, is you will die. And if you die thinking of Krishna, what is the problem? Once you have accepted that, then anything that happens is just going up. Always an improvement. Jai Shla Prabhupada ki. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Happy Narasimha Dev Chaturdasi.